Good evening, everyone, and I just would ask if everyone can please take their seats. And I'd very much like to welcome all of you here today to Beth Tzedec. This is an important topic that we're all here to engage in this evening. We all know that synagogue life is changing. We all know that what it means to be part of a synagogue community is changing. And we also all know, especially all of us in this room, that we want to be on the cutting edge of that change. And to keep our community vibrant and relevant as we move forward into what we know is going to be a challenging future, but a glorious future. And so at this point, I would like to call forward Harvey Silverstone, who will introduce our guest from Toronto this evening. Don't hold that against him. And although I welcomed him when I met the rabbi today, I did welcome him to the tropics, since it seems to be much colder in Toronto at the moment than it is here. So at this point, I would like to turn the mic over to Harvey Silverstone so that he can better introduce our guest this evening. Thank you, Harvey.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for showing up and making this a very nice, warm olam. When I was asked to formally introduce the speaker, I Googled to see what the protocol is. How many minutes should a person introduce a speaker? Nothing in there. So I figured when we go to eat and we leave a tip, we leave 15%. So I figured most rabbinical sermons are 25 minutes, so I get 15% on 25 minutes, get about 3.5 minutes. So that's what we're looking at. We're really honored to have Rabbi Yossi Sapirman with us tonight. My wife Bev and I have known him for a long time. Bev and I, when we lived in Toronto, were members of Beth Torah congregation prior to when he arrived, and we were able to see the wonderful transition and the impact that he had in making a major transformation of what was once a small synagogue with old values, nice people, but not attracting a younger generation and living too close to the traditional side. And he really built a wonderful model on how to get children to come back and families to come back and make Judaism meaningful. Under his leadership, really, he turned this, what was at one time a moribund congregation, into a very active, younger thinking organization that the newspapers, in writing about it, called the shul that rocks. So it's a nice way of talking about it. Besides his wonderful leadership skills and his speaking skills, he has a wonderful way with a story. And I can tell you, when I was asked to make the introduction, I sang, which one of my Rabbi Yossi stories am I going to tell? Because there are so many good ones. But I settled on one that I think was the best. It was about 21 years ago. He's been the senior rabbi now, 21 years at Beth Torah, which in itself is quite remarkable. When he was hired as a young man, I think maybe perhaps 29 years old at the time, he came in and with a long list of things that he wanted to do to modernize the services and change the organization. And in his first Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah went very well. Everybody was there. They loved his sermon. They loved his idea. He introduced things which were then quite unique for the congregation at the time. Readings in English and a lot of other things that really made a warmer atmosphere for all concerned. On Yom Kippur, though, something happened that will live in infamy. By midday, we were all fasting and enjoying the service, and after the completion of one important prayer, all of a sudden, seemingly half the congregation was getting up to leave. And people get up and go sometimes, and if it happens here too. But Rabbi Yossi got up to the mic and he said, "Excuse me, I hope you'll stay, but please, if you're going to leave, please leave quietly. But you should know that in 5 minutes I'm going to deliver my sermon, and I think you might like to stay. It's going to be about pork souvlaki." Everybody's mouth dropped. I heard a guy behind me walk by and say, "This I got to stay for." People walked back to their seats, and I could see in the front row the elders of the congregation putting their head in their hands. "Oy vey, what have we done?" But in 5 minutes, when he started his sermon, he went through a number of points, and one of the themes that he was relating to was that as hard as we try to make improvements in our personal life, in our synagogue life, in our business life, we can try as hard as we want and always have good intent, but there are sometimes things outside of our control that we have to work around. We can always have great ideas, but there sometimes can be greater things that are happening that provide some difficulties. And he related the story that 3 years prior, when he was working in a business, and he took an assignment as a rabbi for the 2 weeks of Yom Tov with a small fledgling congregation in an area of Toronto called the Beaches, which you may know was in the East End. And this small group of young adults had rented a hall on the Danforth. Danforth Avenue is a commercial street, much like 17th Avenue here. And so they were on the second floor, and it was a hot September day. The windows were open to get a little bit of a cross draft, and they were davening and praying, and all of a sudden, at about just before 12, on Yom Kippur, he starts smelling something. He starts smelling pork souvlaki being grilled downstairs at the Greek restaurant on the first floor. And he says, this was an example of sometimes you have to carry on, even though with something outside of your control stops you from doing something. You have to continue. And it's a lesson that I learned a long time ago from him. So it's my great honor to introduce Rabbi Yossi Sapirman, and a wonderful rabbi, a great person, and my friend. Rabbi Yossi.
Thanks, Harv. I was just thinking about pork souvlaki. That's it. In Judaism, we always make a narrative to explain things. But listen, I was wondering, how long should I speak for tonight? And I Googled it. What would be the right length of time for a rabbi visiting a community? And I couldn't find anything. I found one site that said it should have a beginning, a middle, of an end, and they should come as close together as possible. But that's not going to work. So I said to myself, let me see, from the time Harvey leaves where he lives to get to the shul, I'll prepare something. Turns out he lives 3 minutes away. So, Harvey, I got to go back to plan B, which is, I'm going to read what Harvey gave me to read to you. That's really what it is. 1 second, it has to recognize me. There we go. So, the plan for tonight is threefold. First of all, it's to tell you how delighted I am to be here and how nice it is to see so many people out here. Some people I have a connection to, some people I don't. I value everybody's participation and input, and we'll get a chance when I conclude my remarks to take quite a bit of Q&A, at which point you'll discover that I prefer questions rather than statements, but I'm open to any kind of conversation. Then post-event, there will be, I believe there's dessert. Thank God for dessert. And you're more than welcome to corner me and disagree or agree or tell me whatever. I'm really interested. I I didn't know there were Jews outside of Toronto. Sorry. Except for maybe Mr. Thal, whose kids are at my congregation. So I heard about you. I already got the whole schmooze that your wife couldn't come, and so I got the whole story. So, well, it's recorded. Yeah. Being a long-term congregational rabbi can be summed up in one Charlie Brown cartoon. Charlie Brown's cartoon says, "Sometimes I lie awake at night and I ask, where have I gone wrong? And then a voice says to me, this is going to take more than one night." And when we deal with shuls and what's wrong or what's right, this is going to take more than one night. Let's do a little bit tonight. We'll talk. I'll throw some stuff at you. I didn't come to talk about Calgary. I came to talk about my experience in bringing a shul from the brink to success, the things I've learned. And I figured if I put them out there, each one of you has a different experience. Some things might speak to you, some might not. But overall, in its entirety, I think I'm going to speak to everybody tonight. So as Harvey mentioned, I've been there for 21 years. I'm the senior rabbi and the CEO of our congregation. I'm very engaged in all aspects of life. I'm very detail-oriented. I believe in many of the things that make a great business successful. I believe that a synagogue is a business that does charity, not a charity that does business. And that is one of the most important things, because if you're not successful, you can't be great. In my own life, I've also learned to think about what my values are and who I am and what journey am I on, and my shul has helped form me. And that's part of the joy of being able to be a congregational rabbi, is you learn every single day from everybody. Now, I applaud you because this shul has a reputation as second to none. It's the center of the Jewish community. Despite whatever challenges you may have or have had or will have, it doesn't mean that your history is negated, and also doesn't mean that your future is at risk. This shul has everything about it that can make it great. So fear not. You'll get through whatever's challenging you, and you'll be great. It's just a matter of people participating in the effort that it will take to make it great. And the effort is not just equity or time or money. It's often largesse, opening your heart to the greater vision of what is possible. I just want to give a special thank you to your cantor, Cantor Russell, and I had lunch today, facilitated by Harvey and Bev. And, I might as well speak to you directly, Russ. It was a pleasure. Really, you're a very fine man. I had no idea that you were out here. Harvey made me sign an agreement I wouldn't try to recruit you to Toronto. But I can tell you, this congregation's very lucky to have you. So, well, I've been married more than once, so I'm very cautious with my wives now. So you're more than welcome to give her a call. Or unless the Dreamliner wasn't too bad, actually, I should tell you. That's nicht gefährlich. Well, let's wait till fly fishing season opens and we'll talk, okay? Nothing would make me happier, really, than to sort of leave Toronto, but Harvey says to me, I'll never leave Toronto. Harvey, I don't know if I can prove you wrong, but I think in my heart I want to leave Toronto. Truly. When I first started, there was a job opportunity in Victoria, and I never took it. And I'm grateful I didn't. But I feel very lucky to be in Toronto. It's a rare thing to be in a great conservative pulpit anywhere, and especially in a city like Toronto. So I'm not talking about Calgary tonight specifically, because I don't know enough about the congregation. I don't want to be presumptuous that I understand the challenges you have. Every congregation has similar, but often very different challenges. So what I'm going to propose to do is share my things, my ideas, and then you can easily translate that into you and feed that back to me through Q&A. I was born in Lakewood, New Jersey in 1968 to an ultra frum family. I come from what we'd call Haredi. I left home at 15. I made my way in the world. I did many things before I became a rabbi. I'm very curious and interested, and I'm on a great adventure called life, and I'm I have no shame about anything I've done in my past, and my rule is the only thing I regret are the things I have not done. But this adventure has made me probably different than some of my colleagues on the bima and off, and not different deliberately, just by my very nature. I'm very open and caring, and I care about people, and I love what I do, but I also don't believe in doing it just because it's always been done that way, and I'm willing to analyze everything. And friends, if you ever left home and you have to recreate the center of your life and your heart, everything is on the table, always. So that's how I feel about shul. Everything is on the table, always. Judaism is a choice. Jewish life is a choice. Jewish engagement. And so is tradition, even though tradition has a set of guidelines that we agree on. Our synagogue has just about 500 families, and deliberately so. We're a boutique synagogue. We cannot really grow. Our building does not handle more than that. We have one Shabbat service, one high holiday service, one big room, one cantor, one rabbi. We don't want to have multiple communities within our congregation. I have a cantor who assists me, and when I'm not there, he does an admirable job, much like your cantor, although your cantor does significantly more. My cantor is an assistant to me, so to speak, but also we backfill with other scholars and clergy, which are much more prevalent in Toronto. My philosophy when I deal with staff is when you join our congregation, we meet you, we interview you, go through an extensive interview process. We're mission focused. You have to be mission critical to us, and you have to be willing to join the mission. And every person that joins gets a gift the day that they start at shul, and it's a plunger. And on the plunger it says, whatever it takes. And I learned that when I was in Peterborough, and the president of the shul would be called out to unblock the toilets whenever they got stuck. And I said to myself, that is what you have to be prepared to do to succeed, whatever it takes. There is nothing beneath my dignity at my shul, nothing. And I mean that about people, and I mean that about toilets. I mean whatever is required, and I expect staff to live that way. Nobody walks by a piece of paper on the floor without bending over and picking it up, except for me, because I need to lose weight. But everyone else, but that's the rule. Whatever it takes. Now let's talk about shuls. I want to talk about something called inverse relationships. An inverse relationship is about when one thing increases, another thing decreases. An inverse relationship would be like being on a seesaw in the park. When one goes up, one goes down. That's what an inverse relationship is. If one thing is true, another thing is less true. For example, if you've ever been to Toronto, there's a place called Bagel World, and at Bagel World there was a parking meter installed right next to a fire hydrant. Now, how can you have a parking meter next to a fire hydrant? Either you're allowed to park or you're not allowed to park. So what happens when you put the fire hydrant was there, you put the meter there, does that mean they're saying, but in this spot you can park? So it's an inverse relationship. By putting a meter there, you're changing the relationship to the fire hydrant, but it was unclear. But most inverse relationships are very clear, up, down. So, Jewish life is a complex series of moving parts, and the inverse relationships in Jewish life, I will share 10 of them with you. Some might be more or less interesting. Some are more or less interesting to me, but they all pertain to synagogue life. The first one is the people who are committed to shul are the least likely to want change. So while you're seeking to engage the regulars, and they are your stronger supporters, and you want them to change, they are the ones who most likely will demand that the unengaged need change, but they don't. But since they are your regulars, they're least likely to want change because they like what you're doing. That's why they're here. If they're here and you say that you change, they say, why should we change? We're here for what you've got. Yeah, but those people out there, the 3-day-a-year people, they all need change. I don't know. I like it. It's hard to make change with people who like what you're doing. Number 2, praying in Hebrew is a guarantee that most of the congregation will feel left out or uncomfortable. But how can you not keep tradition and liturgy alive? How can you keep tradition and liturgy alive without praying in Hebrew? And you don't have to raise your hands, but ask yourself, is your Hebrew sufficiently good enough that when you pray, more than just the music or more than just the translation is second nature to you? And the answer is probably not. Most people do not read Hebrew. Most people cannot get enough out of the Hebrew, and very few people can actually get enough out of the Hebrew, which is written in an often archaic and poetic style, to really feel what is happening there. But can you imagine not praying in Hebrew? The law says you don't. Only the Shema has to be in Hebrew. But who in their right mind could change that? It's an inverse relationship. We keep the tradition and the liturgy alive. At the same time, you're losing people. How do you balance that? And this is not an either or. It goes up and down. Number 3, we know that if people push religion into your face, it's a turnoff. So is it better to sneak up on people? Like just say, no, we're not having shul, we're having family time with Hashem. And there's a lot of that in the Jewish community where people will create so-called networks, organizations, but really it's about driving people to their religious affiliation, beliefs, or fundraising. Conservative shuls are pretty upfront about what they do. But it might not be working. So how do you get people in? It's a challenge. Do you hide it? Do you say, and I've had a chance to speak to your executive and board, and it was really interesting to talk about how you shift things slightly so that it works, and it's not exactly this, it's not exactly that. But you have to be upfront about it and say, we're willing to make these changes, or do you not say it and you just act like, it's not really what you're worried about. It's a challenge. Here's a conundrum that may sound familiar to you. For a rabbi to lead, they must be the final authority on Judaism in their congregation. Yet for a rabbi to be successful, they need to adapt to the will of the congregation. How do you have a rabbi who is both capable of being the absolute leader and the absolute listener and the absolute adapter and adopter? How do you do that? Not every rabbi can handle that. Don't fool yourself. A lot of rabbis walk to the pulpit, and only when they're on the pulpit do they feel secure in their existence. They need the adoration, they need the love, they need the constant stroking to feel really good about what they do. So they often use their power. Some rabbis don't need that. Some rabbis are just happy with who they are, but maybe they're not forceful enough. It's a very big challenge when you give that kind of authority to someone, and yet at the same time people are asking for help in engaging. Rabbis cannot lead by status. And although respect for rabbinic tradition underpins everything we do in Jewish life, our times dictate that that type of authority does not work. Fear and guilt and power do not work in Jewish life. A new generation will walk away from someone who says, I'm in charge. They just won't come. But yet at the same time, you can't disempower your rabbi. You can't say, you're basically just a talking head. You do what we tell you. There has to be a balance struck. I do believe that rabbis have to be more than just the typical pulpit. Rabbis need to be a vast array of things at once. And it's a challenge to find the right one. But I'm not going to dwell on that. You've been through your own challenges, and God bless your efforts. I think this community has a lot to speak for itself about how well you've handled your rocky waters. Number 6. Oh, was there number 5? 5 was fear and guilt don't work. Number Nope, number 5. I'm up to number 5. If Judaism is ancient, which is one of the things we teach, Judaism is an ancient religion, maybe it's old. Maybe when kids hear ancient, they hear archaic, irrelevant, out of date, out of touch. How do we talk about the power of the ancient Jewish idea without feeling like we're old? If Judaism wants to present itself as modern, and we always are remaking tradition to make it relevant, how modern do we get? How do we continue to justify unequal treatment in our shuls for men and women, or for gay and lesbian congregants, or even for interfaith families? How do we understand the relationships we have to have with all these new challenges to Judaism's ancient status, and yet to be modern and engaged to the reality of our community? How do we do that? Number 6, Judaism is inspired by God. Some people believe every word in the Torah is written by God. It's divine authority. And yet studies will show that more than 50% of Jews don't believe. Which means, maybe this half of the room. If you ask yourself, what do you believe? And I'm going to talk briefly about what I believe. If you ask yourself what you believe, you're likely as a Jew asking yourself, do I really believe? And a lot of people don't. So to use God as a hammer, as though we all believe and we all accept the doctrine, is a mistake. We have to be unafraid to address the fact that even if you don't believe, Judaism is a brilliant, vital, and important tradition. You can't have too much God in your shul. But if you don't have God, then you're just an idea. Number 7, if prayer is the central program of a synagogue and decorum is critical, how do kids fit in? How are you going to have kids at your high holiday service if everyone's going shh, shh? It's like, I always joke, people come to a baby naming at shul, and a little kid starts to cry, and I go, who ever imagined that kids belong at a baby naming? Well, how do you manage that? This I want a show of hands. Are you willing to come to shul on high holidays knowing, not the whole time, but for 1 hour, kids will be welcome to do, parents will maintain as much decorum, but there will be babies crying. How many of you would tolerate an hour on the high holidays of babies? How many of you would not tolerate an hour on high holidays? It's feel free. I'm not going to give you a hard time. So how many of you would tolerate an hour of your own grandchild screaming in shul? Not screaming, fetching, or just cooing at you. You know, we're split on this. This is not an easy thing. How do we keep our kids in shul if we won't let them in there? How do we have the right to complain that nobody comes to shul anymore when for generations we kick them out? How do we have the right to complain about our kids not marrying Jewish kids when girls were told they're not equal to boys? Or when everything was about fear and guilt? What did we expect would happen? It's a balance. I'm not saying one or the other. These are inverse relationships. You let the kids in, yet people get up and go, I can't take this. I can't take that guy's illegitimate child is screaming in shul. It's not illegitimate. It's illegitimate if he's screaming in my shul, I'm telling you. Shul cannot be money driven. We know that, right? That's principle number 7. But if you don't have money, well, how are you going to survive? How many shuls close because their deficit just overwhelms them, and they live on the fat of their endowments and their building, and they start selling it off. Eventually, it's done, and it happens very quickly. Because if this shul lost 100 families, God forbid, for whatever reason, you know what that represents. That's a huge chunk, and that's a huge deficit. Now, maybe you guys are really in good shape, but many shuls are not. And how do you balance between monetizing your shul and not monetizing your shul? Does everything have a cost? If everything has a cost, people will go to somewhere else where it's free. How do you balance? How do you create product, or how do you create quality that makes it compelling? I remember one of my members was talking to me before their bar mitzvah, and he said, Rabbi, it's a disgrace that your shul charges money to have a bar mitzvah here. I said, why is that a disgrace? He says, because when I grew up in Rabbi Aronoff's basement in Toronto, nothing ever felt as good as Jewish life in that squished basement with schmaltz herring on paper plates. It felt so good, and who ever knew about money? That's what we should be. I said, really? That's what we should be? Yes, he actually believed shuls should somehow operate like Rabbi Aronoff's basement. That's what he felt. I don't know. Schmaltz herring's not bad, but you should eat it with a fork. You should never give it. It's a gift that keeps on giving if you eat it with your hands. Yeah. Number 9, if you grow your shul, it feels less intimate. I remember when I grew Beth Torah, I heard constantly, it's not Hamish anymore. This is not Hamish. What's Hamish? 4 people? How many people did you need to make it Hamish? The answer was, when our family was in charge, it was Hamish. Ah, I see. How many people was that? About 120. That was on high holidays. Harvey, when you were there before I got there, how many people used to come on high holidays? About 250?
No, we had about 400 or 500.
I don't know. Some of them were dead in their seats. They were there from last year. Yeah. I'm just kidding. But the reality is that Hamish to different people means different things. But the moment it started to grow and we had this waiting list, people were saying, it's a slippery slope. We're going to become a cathedral synagogue. Da, 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 da. I don't think it happened. Yes, we went to 500 families from 180 when I kind of arrived there. But there's many ways to make it Hamish. I was mentioning at the board conversation, or when I spoke to, was it Maxine? Maxine, I spoke to Maxine and I told her that I meet every new member that comes to shul. You can join, but I have to meet you, because how could we even begin a conversation about Hamish if I don't know who you are, or you don't know who I am, and we can't have a conversation about what we are. So if you're successful here at your shul, let's say you add another 100 families, how are you going to ensure that they feel welcomed here? How are you going to ensure they feel part of it? How are you going to ensure that they feel as important as the founders? Because they're the keepers. So I know that history counts for a lot, but if they're really your future and you're investing heavily into them, how do you treasure those people? Number 10, is this shul self-determined? Or do you follow denominational norms, United Synagogue? Are you beholden to ideas that are not self-determining? Are you prepared to self-determine? That's the question. Are you going to do what's best for this shul, in this place, in this city, with these people at this time? Or are you going to try to follow someone else's model? That's the question. If you give up on convention and you forge your own path, who are you? How successful is just curious, how successful is your shul because it belongs to United Synagogue? How much of an impact has that really had on your shul? If you're not sure, it's the kind of thing that should be answered. Because maybe you just need to be conservative style without being part of the movement. Maybe that will free you up. It might be harder to find a rabbi. Maybe that's a good reason to stay in. There's nothing wrong with belonging to a professional body. It makes sense. But you need to figure it out and then see whether you're getting your maximum value out of United Synagogue. We joined. I made sure the shul joined, but I insist on getting value out of it because it's a lot of money to give away for just a name. Mostly what it costs us that if any of you decide to come to high holidays in Toronto, I have to give you free tickets, right? That's what it means. We have a reciprocal relationship. By the way, if any of you want to come to shul in high holidays in Toronto, we live stream it now so you can stay home. Don't worry about it. Those are the inverse relationships. They are a collection of ideas that when we talk about as on this hand, on that hand, that's what we're referring to. What time did I start, Harvey? What do I have, 10 more minutes? Okay. Anyone here of JFK? Remember JFK? Where were you? You remember? I wasn't born. JFK means just for Kiddush. That's what it means. In every shul, you have people who are JFK. Okay? There's a resentment that comes along. Look at that Schmendrick. I could see him now. He just showed up now because he knows that Cantor Russ is going to finish at 12:05. He prances in, azoy wie apuritz dorten, hello, ich bin du. I was here the whole time, but in the bathroom. I'm just saying. And he's a JFK Nick, and people hate that. And you hate it. I know, because our hard-earned money goes to you. You've probably been to 2 other Kiddushes already today. Part of the challenge is finding out how to include the JFK, because the JFK might become more than just for Kiddush. Maybe they'll come for a little bit longer. Maybe they'll come to events. You never know. Maybe JFK is part of the entree for a generation that doesn't really know why they're going to your shul. Maybe the camaraderie, maybe a kind word from someone is really the best word they've heard all week. In any shul, if you want to succeed, you need 2 things to happen. You need to have great clergy, and you need to have a great board and executive. And they need to learn how to communicate with each other and to communicate to the congregation. That's part 1. Part 2, and all of you in this room can help. You need to make sure that when you communicate with your clergy and your board, you're helping them, not hurting them. It is so easy to complain. It is so easy to overwhelm them with issues that are mundane or important. And it's not like they have all the answers, but they need to hear from you. And the fact that you're out here tonight probably means you have an interest in the future of your shul. And you can be helpful, and you can be most helpful by when you hear other people complaining, you should say, guys, this board works incredibly hard to do what they are doing. We all work incredibly hard. Our clergy work incredibly hard. Let's be supportive. Let's take a risk that instead of complaining, we'll say nice things. Why don't we encourage them? Would you treat your child that way? Nobody would treat their child. Nobody would treat their child the way that we treat our clergy. Well, I have to say that's not actually true. Some clergy deserve it. Anyhow, because leadership is real live people, and what goes in comes out. And if you have great ideas for your shul, your clergy and your board want to hear it. But remember, if you put up your hand and say, I have a great idea, you probably should also be saying, and I'm willing to help. Because if you say you're willing to help, anything goes. In the last few minutes that I have, I want to share with you very briefly 10 beliefs that I have. I'll read them to you quickly. They'll be available. I could even send them to Harvey if you want to read them slowly. And I think it's important that rabbis, I can't speak for cantors, your cantor is a good communicator. Rabbis have to communicate to their congregations what they believe, so you know who you're dealing with. I believe that a synagogue ought to answer this question to its members: what's in it for me? Number 2, I believe that remaining Jewish is dependent more on loving being Jewish than on knowing how to act Jewish. We have to make people love what goes on in a synagogue. I believe that the synagogue is a center of Jewish inspiration, not the center of Jewish life. That occurs in the rest of our living, especially at home. That means parents have responsibility. I believe that a wide gamut of good personal choices are part of the Jewish experience. We ought to build a bigger tent, embrace the yes and the no, while being realistic about our values. It is possible in one shul to have yes and no and still figure it out. I believe that belief is private and behavior is public. I believe that living your Judaism is a personal choice that emanates from an ancient obligation. I believe that remaining Jewish is a choice, and simply assuming that obligation is sufficiently powerful to maintain continuity is a primary source of religion's failure. What I mean by that is just because you're taught, guilted, threatened, afraid, or everyone else does it is not enough to ensure that you too will do it unless it feels like something you want to do. I believe that contemporary Jewish life is meant to reside at the intersection of tradition and modernity. I believe that Israel is our homeland, ancient and modern, and it resides at the intersection of impossibility and justice. I believe that halacha, Jewish law, must be filtered through humanism. Jewish law is about structure and identity, and living Jewishly is about the struggle for both. Judaism is intended to support, not enslave, humankind. Those are my beliefs. They're very clear, and I live by them every day. And finally, I just want to share a couple quick business terms with you that you can go from here and talk about, think about, ask questions about. Does anyone know what GAAP is? GAAP. GAAP is generally accepted accounting principles. There's rules of how you do accounting. And I say GAAP is what I call generally accepted achdut principles. What are the principles that build communities that are unified versus how everybody makes their own rules up about what's best for their own community? You need to have a set of unified, accepted principles of what the shul is and isn't before you can figure out whether you're a real community or not. You can't have islands of accepted principles. There's something else called EPS. EPS is, anyone know? No? Someone say it loud. Earnings per share. How do you know that, Harvey? Earnings per share, of course. I own how many shares? What do I earn? I call a shul YPS, which is yearnings per share. How do you build the yearning in your community so every person who has a share, because if you're a member of a shul, you are a member with share capital of a corporation, a not-for-profit corporation. Maybe in Alberta it's different, I don't know. But how do you build earnings and yearnings? How do you build the yearnings per share? Finally, some very simple principles that are in short form that I believe will make a difference in every synagogue that applies them, and anybody who wishes to discuss these further, I'm happy to do it. Wow every attendee at your shul. A new person should come here and say, wow, that was great. A shul needs to talk about its treasured values so you can all own them. My dear friend Ed Staros runs the Ritz-Carlton in Naples. No, I can't get you a discount. I took it already. But Ed Staros and the Ritz-Carlton chain have created books and literature, and their employees all carry around a values and ethics card. Folds out. You can ask any one of them at any time, could I see your employee values card? They'll say, oh yeah, it's right here. Every member of this shul should be able to describe your treasured values. They should be short, easy, and you should be able to meet anyone on the street and say, that's why I go there. And people love that kind of enthusiasm because those are your yearnings per share. There are three primary goals in a shul: human to human, human to heaven, and heaven to human. Don't forget any one of them. Sometimes it's okay to just have human-to-human connections. Sometimes it's okay to be entirely spiritual. Sometimes it's okay to blend it. You got to know when the right thing is appropriate. Learn the meaning of what you're doing here. Don't just do it by rote. Don't just do it because your parents or grandparents did it. Make sure you ask and say, why do we do this? Not negatively. I really want to know. You know why? Because if I know, when I'm sitting with my grandchild lighting Hanukkah candles, I can explain to them what it means. Take the time to learn a little bit, and suddenly you'll discover that you are a great teacher. Judaism is an open source project. Anybody can access it. Trust in your clergy and your leadership, or change it. Complaining does nothing. Differentiate your synagogue, be unique, develop your own potential, but stay part of the group. GAP, generally accepted achdut, togetherness principles. Be unafraid to change. Be as unafraid to change as you are to remain the same. Very important. Do not be afraid to ask for commitment if you provide value. If this shul provides value, every time somebody comes in here, they feel they got something out of it, don't be afraid. People will join you. People will pay. They'll pay more than you think they'll pay because you give them something they can't get anywhere else. A moth goes to see a podiatrist. The moth goes to see the podiatrist and says, I got problems with my kids. I got problems with my family. I don't make a living. The podiatrist says, whoa, 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 excuse me. I'm a podiatrist. Moth says, yeah. He says, I can't help you with family problems. I do feet. He says to the moth, why did you come to me? Don't you know there's a toe at the front door. The moth says, I came to you because the light was on. Friends, if the light is on at your shul, people will come to you. That's your job. Turn that light on and leave it on and be ready for people to come. All right, thank you. Okay, so this gives me a chance to do some exercise. There you go, that's 8,001, 8,002, 8,003, 8,004, 5, perfect. You have to leave me a minute at the end to tell you one last thing, but I'll take any question you've got. Go ahead, just tell me your first name, just for fun.
Hey, my name is Sid. I want to go back to Port Souvlaki.
Right on.
Like your shul before, this shul has a mass exodus on the high holidays.
Sorry, would it be better if I gave him the mic? Yes. I'll come down. No, it's easier. I'll just walk around. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to get back to Port Souvlaki. What?
When I give you the mic, doesn't mean you're the rabbi. Just saying.
I wouldn't want your job for anything. Okay, back to Port Souvlaki and the mass exodus that happens, especially on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, right after the Torah reading, or on Yom Kippur right after Yizkor. Everybody leaves before Musaf. I shouldn't say everybody, only 80% leave. What did your shul do specifically to reduce that mass migration and extinction? Did you shorten the service? Did you get people more involved other than now it's time to stand, now it's time to sit, and etc.? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So what do we do to stem the mass exodus? Well, I can tell you that serving lunch on Yom Kippur keeps people, just saying, for the record. We do have some form of exodus, but in our shul, I feel very fortunate. They leave after I finish speaking, which means they've chosen the right rabbi for them. They want to hear what I have to say. So if people are leaving before the sermon, it's because they don't want to hear what the rabbi's got to say. People vote with their feet. People pray with their feet, as Joshua Heschel said. They vote with their feet. The other thing we do is we never hide what time we're going to do Yizkor. As a matter of fact, I've begun probably about 7 or 8 years ago, except for Yom Kippur. On holidays, whenever Yizkor comes out, often on a Monday or Tuesday or whenever, I do Yizkor at 9:45 a.m. I tell them I'm going to do Yizkor at 9:45 a.m. And I just do Yizkor at 9:45 a.m. And then we say, to all of you who have to go back to work, Chag Sameach, grab some coffee and cake on your way out, and Good Yom Tif. And we don't treat everyone like they're infantile. We don't play games with their Yizkor. We don't tell them you might have to wait. We'll keep it to the end, keep it to the beginning. You develop trust with your congregation. They know that if they stay, you ready? You're going to finish on time. They know when I'm going to finish, pretty much. On Rosh Hashanah, what time do you finish here? What time? And none of you get diabetes from sitting here? We finish at 12:30. We start at 8 a.m. Because most people don't want to come for Psukkah de Zimra. And most people don't really want to be there for Torah reading because this is the 3-day-a-year crowd, but they want to be there for shofar. And shofar, on my ticket, says 9:45, and they can set it like a Swiss clock. And then I'm finished around 12:30. So people they're assured that we're not going to take advantage of their loyalty and get off on them being in our shul. So we develop trust. Once you start to develop trust, you also have to have content. If you have content, they stay. Now, I've had times, which is really strange, where I'm going to speak, I know, at 11:30 is when my sermon is, give or take. We finish most of the tefillah before I start, so let's say I push it back to 11:45. We're now up to the Kaddish after Musaf on Rosh Hashanah. I go speak for 25 minutes. There's 5 minutes of tefillah left. And I say, could you all just stay? No, they can't. It's Pavlovian. It's built in. We're all leaving Egypt all the time. We're all on an Exodus journey. Yeah. The reality is, it starts off with this back and forth, this quid pro quo. A shul needs to put a compelling voice on the bima and needs to treat people like grown-ups, not like kids. It's very important. Good question. Who has a question here? Anybody? Is there anything you'd like to ask me? You sure? Okay. Later. Anybody? I'm coming. Nice hat.
Hi, I've been coming to Beth Tzedec for, I guess, about 7 or 8 years now. And it's quite obvious to me, I've met second generation members that come to different functions, and I've been told several times now that they say to me, I'm a secular Jew. And I find it quite surprising. So I'm just curious, is there a movement out there? Is the youth or the young people becoming secular Jews? I'm just wondering what your answer is.
So remember what I said about Charlie Brown, this is going to take more than one night? Kids nowadays are anxious about everything. Kids nowadays are not secular. They're often more committed than their parents are, but they don't know how to express it because they feel uncomfortable. Kids nowadays don't feel comfortable in organized religion because organized religion is a place where you go so someone can prove to you that you don't know anything. It's a place where you go to be uncomfortable. It's a place where you go to be embarrassed. It's a place where you went for your bar mitzvah and you felt like a goofball on the bima, right? The experience we've created for young people is one in which they don't really belong. It doesn't speak their language. It's easier to call yourself secular than it is to say, I feel stupid. There are people who are secular. What does that even mean? It means the same person that will tell you they're secular will also tell you, but I'm spiritual. How can you be both secular and spiritual at the same time? The answer is, we have a search for meaning. Everybody does. We don't know how to say what we're really feeling. We all want to feel something important. We want to believe that all the stuff we've been told about Jewish life is real. But here's the question. This is part of a long, ongoing conversation I've had with my congregation. It's from the phrase, my love, if you gave me the key to your heart, why do you make me knock? Why, as a young Jew, do I have to keep knocking on the door? If you said you gave me the key, I can come in whenever I want. Let me come in. But no, you make me knock before I come in. What's that all about? By making our young people uncomfortable in their, what we call a natural environment, we've told them, we love you, come anytime, but remember, knock first, because it's going to be weird for you. So the answer is not that you have to change tremendously, but you asked a question that really needs to be answered by everybody in the room. You need to know your values. You need to say, we welcome you, whether you're secular or spiritual, so long as you are fundamentally part of the Jewish community and you have Jewish values. That does not negate your conservative Judaism values, but it does reach out to someone where you've just told them they're welcome no matter what. The other thing that has to happen is, and I can't speak for any of you young people in the room, when you get old like me, you know this is true, and this is how it works. If you're older, you need to put up your hand when someone says, can you help me make change? Young people have no problem making change. Younger people don't even know what should have been. But those of you who know exactly how it has to be, Yadcha tiyabo barishana, your hand has to go up first. If I were coming here as your rabbi, which unfortunately tonight I can't, I have to talk to my wife first. I would love to. Why? Because this is enthusiasm that I love. But if I were coming here and I'm saying, I need change, what's the first change I need? I don't know. As a matter of fact, if I were your rabbi and I was coming here, I wouldn't change anything for a year. If you hire a new rabbi, I'm telling you right now, you say to him, don't touch anything. Learn, listen, talk, and after a year, we'll sit down, we'll have a report. You'll tell us what you want to change. We'll have a conversation, but then you'll be doing it based on what we want, not based on what you want. Because what do you know about us? And if the change does come, your commitment in return is to say, I've been doing it this way for 50 years, and my grandparents did it for 80, and my great-parents, but I'm going to be the first one to stand up and say, when it's time to change, I'm in, so long as it's the right thing for your shul. If you can say that about yourself, your future's guaranteed. Because shuls need to change just a little bit to have a long-term impact. But it's a very good question. So when you meet someone who says, I'm secular, you know what you say? Rabbi Yossi told me that secular Jews are untainted by religion or politics, so you're always welcome. Say that. Yeah.
Rabbi, how long did it take your congregation to make a change so that you attracted more membership? And how close are you are you closer to a Reform synagogue than you are to an Orthodox synagogue?
Two great questions. Two very good questions. How long did it take before I started making changes that were impactful? And where do we fit in? I'm going to answer the second question first. We don't fit in. We do what's best for our congregation. I come from an ultra-Orthodox background, and if you came to our shul and closed your eyes, sometimes you'd go, Oi, I'm in the yeshiva again. Sometimes you'll come and you'll go, even Reform wouldn't do that. The answer is, there's a huge gamut of what you can and cannot do. Shuls have to have the courage to choose what's right for them. I am not afraid to be undefined denominationally. My denomination is ultra-Orthodox. That's where I grew up. But I didn't leave there to jump with 2 feet into someone else's orthodoxy or someone else's denomination. And I don't think it is that important to pay loyalty to a denomination, because I think you can do better to describe yourselves without talking about other people. If this shul can say, we're conservative, not as opposed to Reform, not as opposed to Orthodox, not as opposed to this or that, we're conservative, which means, remember that value statement? Conservative means that we are the ultimate blend between modernity and tradition. Right there, you have not made a denominational statement. What you're suggesting is that you're a perfect blend. And you know, denominations are something that young people do not understand. And I would challenge most of you in the room, does anybody here really feel They could talk to me one-on-one about the true differences between Reform and Conservative Judaism, not the visible, the real differences. Does anyone feel qualified to have that conversation? I'm not challenging you negatively. I'm just saying, do you feel you're qualified? We spend so much of our time talking about Reform versus Conservative. We spend so much of our time talking about Reform versus Conservative versus Orthodox. Do you know that in the prayer book that you use on Shabbat, the differences between the Orthodox prayer book, other than the fact that it has imahot, the mothers in there, if you take that out, the primary difference is that we say that when the temple is rebuilt, hopefully, or the temple of yore, that is where we used to sacrifice animals. And in the Orthodox shul, they say, that is, we're going to go sacrifice animals again. That's the primary difference. And there's things you take out, there's things you add in. That is the primary difference of attitude. The rest of it, there's so much shtick. Denominationalism is a way in which we choose what color we're going to wear for which team, but there aren't that many differences, because if we really focus on what's important in Judaism, we're all pretty much the same. A shul like this is a leader. And to lead just because you belong to one denomination or another is not the best way to do it. In a city like this where everybody has to get along because it's small, denominationalism will not gain you adherence. You know what it will do? It will make people confused. But values will always get you people to join. If you talk about your values instead of what denomination you are, and it's a hard thing to do. I've been talking my whole life. I'm a conservative rabbi. But your shul feels a little different. Yes, you're right. It's a little bit azoy and a little bit azoy. It's a blend of everything good that I found in my life, and I think people like that. I will tell you, I had a very big donor to the shul who withheld their donation of a good six-figure amount for 5 years. And the reason they gave us was because the wood paneling that we put up was too Reform, was too light. In their mind, dark paneling was Orthodox or traditional. Light paneling was Reform. Someone else told me that you didn't put stained glass windows in the new sanctuary. What are we? Reform? I didn't understand that. So it's an excellent question. And your first question was about changes. The changes happened immediately. The first change I made I don't think I made that many changes immediately. I think just me being there was a change. Remember, I was hired by my shul for 3 important reasons. Number 1, I was Jewish. Number 2, I was young. And number 3, I was alive. Think about how good it made me feel to be wanted for my skill and my talent. I waited patiently. I had a lot of problems. I had a very difficult community. Some people were very generous and very much willing to make changes. Others spoke about the changes they're willing to make, but wouldn't finance any of those changes. Here's a great story for you. I wanted to start a Hebrew school. Is that unheard of? Rabbi starting Hebrew school? One of our board members said, I remember the board meeting, we don't have the money for a Hebrew school. I said, so let's try to raise it. Let's raise it. It's going to cost us $80,000 a year to run a Hebrew school. And I was a new rabbi. This guy was an old-timer and a shouter. I said, it's not going to cost $80,000. Here's the plan. It's going to cost $80,000. And besides, there's no emergency exit door in the basement. I said, excuse me. I was down there today. There's an emergency exit in the basement. There's no Rabbi, I've been here my whole life. You're going to tell me? I said, I checked today. He says, listen, there's no emergency exit. I said, excuse me, can we go downstairs and check if there's an emergency exit in the basement? He puts up his hand and says, we're not checking if there's an emergency exit in the basement. Done. Finished. No Hebrew school. A subsequent board meeting, we dealt with it. Nobody ever at that board came to me and said, Rabbi, we checked. There was an emergency exit in the basement. Because there's no emergency exit in the basement was code. It was code language for you're not doing it. Doesn't matter what you're telling us, you're not doing it. It had nothing to do with the emergency exit. So I learned to make change slowly, sometimes by force, sometimes I learned it's easier to apologize than to ask for permission. I'm so sorry, I had no idea that you really wanted to run a shul here. I thought you wanted to run a junkyard. I had no idea. Anyhow, the first major change I made was that I made the bar and bat mitzvah the most important person at the Shabbat service when they had it. The year I arrived there, they had 2. The first year I was there, I think I had 6. And then it grew, and it grew. And now we're going on 21 years, and I have 60 to 65 b'nai mitzvah a year at our synagogue. And it's a longer conversation. Remember I talked about it's not for one night? We offer b'nai mitzvah on Thursdays, on Friday night, on Shabbat morning, on Shabbat afternoon, on Shabbat evening, on Sunday morning, and every kid has their own event. It's a lot more work, but I want to tell you, it builds community. It's a lot more satisfying. It will take away from you a little bit. If you want to go to the main sanctuary and have the main service, and there's some zhlub kid up there on the bima who's occupying all the attention, it's not always so easy. But you know what? A balance can be had. You know, we're adults. Eventually what's going to happen is your cantor certainly will provide you a great experience. Those kids will love being here. All it takes is those kids to bring their friends and do this for a year. Next thing you know, your bookings will go up. You'll have more kids coming. It doesn't take that much. It just means a commitment to making the change happen, even if it's tiny. Then there were other changes I made I don't really want to talk about. Maybe afterwards I'll tell you about it. Okay. Mr. Thal, how are your beautiful little grandbabies doing?
Great. You did a good job with the baby.
Thank you. Better than a moil.
First of all, what time does your Torah service start?
Shabbat morning we start at 8:45. Oh, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, Torah service starts at 9:15.
We're at about 10. But anyways, I've got about maybe 3 questions wrapped up in one. I don't know. But what's going on out there today? Like the world's changing. Are we losing interest in attending shul? We're in the middle. You never want to be in the middle. Conservatism is in the middle. You want to be at one end or the other. Are people going to I don't know what I'm rambling here. Yeah, and I guess what's going on? Everything's changing. Is everybody losing members?
So the more things change, the more they stay the same. I think that Judaism as we know it is stale. I don't think it's speaking to a new generation. I talked earlier about what do we expect from a generation of kids that were asked to leave the sanctuary and not made important. Like, what do we expect? Friends, what do we expect from a generation of kids who every time they want to talk about Judaism are forced to talk about 3 things? The Holocaust, Israel, or anti-Semitism. And you know what? These are really, really important topics, but they're not Judaism. They're the condition of being Jewish. They're not Judaism. We need to talk about Judaism and being Jewish. Things are really not that bad out there. And you know what? I would disagree. You do want to be in the middle. You do want to be that place that can exist between modernity and tradition. You don't want to be so liberal that you're only about social values. You don't want to be so orthodox that you ignore the humanism that is found in every person. You want to be a place that has the right to say, we believe in tradition and we believe in modernity, and our job is to make them synchronize. And I don't know how old you are. Don't tell me, God forbid. But you are a leader for your family. The fact that you're here tonight tells me that you're probably going to say to them, I went to shul on what's tonight? Monday night? To hear the rabbi, and they're interested. Yeah, except it's not a fast day. But things are not as bad as people make them out to be. The program is broken. Let's get a new program. Listen, I'm lucky. We don't have a rate of attrition at our shul. We gain new members. We don't lose. Unfortunately, people die. Sometimes people quit. It's fair. Not everyone's going to stay everywhere. But I will say to you, I don't see that there's a problem. What I see is that there's a bad program. How many times can you go see Cats? Didn't make sense to me the first time I went to see it. Why would I go back 100 times? And why would I go back to see Hamilton after it cost me $800 in San Francisco the first time? And the guy next to me stood up halfway and started shouting about it was just a propaganda tool. Anyhow, my point is, everything would be better if we stopped blaming the people who don't come and we talk to the people who come and say, are you willing to help make the change that will bring those people? And the answer is Chabad. Have you seen what's going on in Chabad? Why is Chabad successful? That's for another night. But I'll tell you right now, it's about personal engagement with each level of your congregation as though they are your family. Not just words, that's the reality. And families speak to families. You can't imitate them. They have capacity way beyond what we have. At the same time, though, if we learn the most important lesson from them is give every person an opportunity to participate, no matter how small it is, and make them feel great about doing it, and claim the right to say, we are also authentic. We don't have to cede authenticity to someone else. We are authentic. Why? Because our values are the most Jewish thing we've got. Don't make every conversation about things that kids don't want to hear about. Don't force them to see pictures of Holocaust concentration camps. Don't force them to have a conversation about Israel when they can't handle the conversation. Make them love Israel. Talk to them about the dream of Zionism. Talk about the hopes for Israel. Talk about the positivity. Let's not talk about every time there's a bombing, every time there's something, rabbis feel compelled to get up and suddenly the whole mood of the room changes, and now the rest of the service is going to be a memorial service. It sucks to be Jewish if you keep doing that. And as much as we feel that we have to be honest, it's really hard to get young people to engage in what hurts them. They'll just flip the channel. This year on Yom Kippur, I had to make a decision. Do I stop the service and announce that in Germany there was an attack? Do I give a sermon about it? Was that Rosh Hashanah or was it Yom Kippur? When was it? It was Yom Kippur. Should I stop? Middle of a service which had great energy, do I get on the beam and say, excuse me, friends, once again, a Jew was attacked, or do I say to myself, unless it's a threat here today, let everyone here feel their Yom Kippur and deal with it after. We are not CNN. Of course, we do a prayer for all those who are under attack. Of course we care. But the idea that we could take our service that is meaningful right here and default to someone else's needs really is a big mistake. And I'll tell you why. Because young people do not want to come and participate in guilt, fear, or anger. They want something meaningful and positive. And it's our job and the job of older generations to not over-focus on those things that you were taught are most important. It's time to reimagine what Judaism can do for young people. And I can tell you, values are universal. Values well spoken by a congregation are so fundamentally attractive, like a moth to the light. If every one of you walks out of here at some point saying, I now know what role I'm serving in this community, you'll be a compelling attractant to your shul. I know you're here. I got last thought.
Rabbi, you have time for two more questions.
Two more questions.
Two more questions.
And a final thought? Or?
Final thought, yes.
Yes.
Two more questions and a final thought.
Thank you, Rabbi. This is a more general question, and I'm just curious to know what you think the role of a shul is in the larger community. in terms of participating in larger community events and things?
It's a very good question that Calgary and Toronto cannot answer the same way. Calgary is a different place. I will say the shul is more the lifeblood of the community than, let's say, a shul in Toronto. I will also caution people, like I said, one of my principles was a shul is not the center of Jewish life. I imagine shul as being a place where you come to charge your batteries. What you do with those batteries, like you charge your cell phone, who you call, what app you use, what good or bad you do with that phone is up to you. But our job is to get you to plug in. You come here to plug in. You come here to understand what's meaningful. You come here to mourn. You come here to worry. You come here to talk. You come here to build community. That's great. But what you do with it after is really up to you. Whether your home is Jewish or whether your life is Jewish, that will have a greater impact on whether your children stay committed rather than shul. In Calgary, from what I understand, this shul is deeply, deeply vibrant and actually acts kind of as a connector for the whole community. I mean, within these walls right now, there's probably enough people here that are connected to every Jewish organization in the city. In Toronto, it's not quite like that. So the answer is in Calgary, in a smaller town, which is too small to be big and too big to be small, that kind of dynamic, this shul represents the heartbeat of this community. As opposed to Toronto, where it's often somewhere you can go once a week, once a month, once a year, and forget about for the rest of the time. If people here forgot about this shul, it wouldn't exist anymore. So there's a very quantitative difference between what goes on here and goes on there. That's something very special and very precious. And a new rabbi needs to understand that, because rabbis often don't understand how important a shul is to their community, especially if they're coming from the States where shuls are far less important sometimes. Anyhow, it's a very good question. And it's worth having a dialogue where you can... And I will tell you, I noticed this shul does not promote itself well. It doesn't tell everyone how great it is. There needs to be a committee, sorry to put the work on someone, to share your great story. When I was out there watching the TV go by with all the things that are happening here, there should be one page every 5 or 6. Not do you know, but something great about this shul. So that when someone like me walks there, I not only know what the JCC is doing and what's going on in the building, but I also walk away with going, wow, I had no idea. It was founded in 1745 by the Métis and the RCMP. I had no idea. But I really think the shul should be, you guys should be flying your flag a little louder, a little higher. It's extraordinary. Last question.
I have two. One that feeds off of the last one. I think part of that question might have been related to the broader community, not just the Jewish community, so you might want to speak to that. And my other question is, you spoke about the shul being a business-giving charity, not a charity running a business. And you've grown your shul from 180 families to 500 families. So my question is the competitive advantage of your shul in a business taking business away from other shuls, or are you engaging with the unaffiliated to bring them into your congregation?
I just want to make sure I understand the first part of the question, which was about the larger community. I'm not sure. Oh, I see. I understand. Do I have to address that tonight, or can I just say it's really important? Okay, I think interfaith work is really important, provided that in-reach comes first. That's my opinion. I think that if the congregation is served really, really well, then it's great to bring other ecumenical partners in and so on. I think it is particularly important if you want to be able to be part of Calgary, which is a smaller town, and be part of it, 100%. But that doesn't always have to be done by the rabbi. Spiritual leaders are not always the best people for that. Sometimes lay people are really great at that because sometimes rabbis are busy, or they should be. That's my opinion. I don't have a lot of time for interfaith work in Toronto, partially because there's been a huge schism in how to do interfaith work. Do we demand that our partners all agree with the position on Israel before we'll talk to them? Or do we just go and reach out to them? And I'm proud to say in Toronto we've done a lot of great work in that regard. But I will also say that the congregation will always come first. Always. Because, and I don't know about Calgary, so maybe I shouldn't continue that because I don't know how important it is here. So rather than suggesting that I know, I'm just going to say I don't know. But I will say in reach before outreach. The second question was about competition and what does it mean that I'm growing. First of all, I'm a small shul. We call it boutique, right? If you go to the Saddle Dome, well, Saddle Dome is all of a shalom. What took over now? Are they still playing in the Saddle Dome? Has anyone told them that it's time for a new building? Good, okay. So, how many people fit in the Saddle Dome? 21,000. In Rogers Centre in Toronto, you can put 52,000 people in. So every game that you go to at the Saddle Dome costs a lot more than baseball does. Baseball, you can get tickets for $12, but the cheapest ticket for hockey is probably like $180 to $200 in Toronto at least. I don't know what it's like here. We're a small shul. We're boutique. We only hold 1,500 people maximum, and that includes kids, babies, adults. We develop programming, so at any time in our building there could be 2,500 people. A lot of them, we have a tent for the kids. We have a barista service on Rosh Hashanah for the teenagers in their own lounge with influencers who can talk to them there. We have an entire tent of kids' activities. We have a basement full. So we have almost 500 or 600 people more in our building than actually are sitting in the seats. So we're oversold. We're basically an airline that just keeps selling tickets until, we bump people, essentially. But we also figure that worst case scenario, there will be standing room for the sermon. So for the 25 minutes that I speak, nish geferlich. So who did we compete with to get it? Well, a large part of our membership now is composed of people who were never comfortable somewhere else. And I don't feel that is about competition, because I think you should be comfortable in your shul. And if somebody doesn't like what we're doing at shul, they should not stay. Whenever someone comes to me and says, I'd like to join at my shul, I say, I'd like you to try it out first. Because I don't want to have disappointed people. I don't want you to come to me after Rosh Hashanah and say, I had no idea how weird this place gets on high holidays. I liked the Shabbat service you did, but I don't want that. I want to be able to deliver on the promise. So the competition that we have is about the quality of experience. And I feel that everybody has the right to demand from their shul the answer, what is in it for me? So I can tell you, the majority of people at Beth Torah are making a choice to be there. We're not in the middle of Bathurst Street. We're off the beaten path. We're not the biggest shul. We're not the wealthiest shul. We're not the most prominent shul. We're pretty darn good, but we're not the top, except in one thing. We don't want you to come unless you want to be there. And I have to say, for a little shul our size in a city like Toronto, we're small. So I don't think we really competed. I know the shuls we've taken from. I have to say, many of my colleagues in Toronto are faced with very large uphill battles about self-identifying, about branding, about understanding how to operate as a business. A lot of shuls have fallen behind, and they still see themselves as these big bodies of charity. I can tell you how we do charity in a way that is most beautiful to me. God forbid someone should come to our shul and say, I can't afford high holiday tickets. The distance between I can't afford it and here's a ticket for you is me. I have people I can consult with if I'm not sure, my executive. But because I know their stories, I know about their cancer, and I know about their mother-in-law, and I know about their failed business or their mental health issues, I don't have to worry about saying, I'll help you out, because I'm going to help you out right now. And we gave over 200 tickets away for high holidays. In a small shul like ours, 200 tickets is a lot of money. A high holiday ticket at our shul costs $675. This is not cheap. This is like giving away a whole section at, Maple Leaf Gardens all of a shalom. But it allows people to keep their dignity. That's why we do it. So you don't have to give me your T4. You don't have to come and beg in front of a committee. You don't have to have some random person call you up and grill you about how many cars you have in your garage. The greatest charity we can do is to be successful and then give it back to our members. We changed the rules. When a person dies, their spouse automatically gets the reserve plot next to them. They used to call within 30 days and say, Mrs. Goldberg, your husband, Olav Sholem, who died, did he leave you enough money to pay a reservation fee of $3,500, which is due tomorrow, or you lose the plot? How do people do that to each other? That is the kind of charity we can do, and that's the extent of our reach, and I insist that we do it, and I insist that our shul, under my watch and the watch of our board and executive, become debt-free, so we can put money in the bank, so we can give kids free Jewish education, so we can give seniors plots even when they can't afford membership anymore. All these things that shuls worry about, these are the quantitative differences that really matter to people, is that someone will take care of them. And if money is a barrier, sometimes it has to be. Not everything can be free. But the truth is, the future of shuls lies in affordability. That's the truth. So the best thing we can do for ourselves is to run a really great business, and so can Calgary. Raise more money than you'll ever know what to do with. And then make everything cheaper. We give kids now until 25 free high holiday tickets. We're moving that to 30 because we realize even 30 is not enough. But I can tell you, we figured out how to run our shul and let our membership dues plus a little bit of deficit offset cover our entire budget. This year we've turned in a positive budget. God willing, the roof won't collapse, the saddle dome won't fall in on us, and we will actually run a positive cash flow budget for Beth Torah, which is an amazing thing for a shul that when Harvey was there was in debt, in gehakte tzoris, like we say, right? It's a very good question, by the way, and I'm not sure I answered it entirely, but the answer is it's not competition if you're great. People vote with their feet. Last thought before I have to conclude, am I right? You're so right on. Man, I think you should take my flight tomorrow and go home to Toronto instead of me. Not a chance. Good night, all, if you're leaving. Yeah. Not a chance. Not a chance. Okay, sorry. I don't want to offend everybody at once. Do you have a school with your shul? We have a school. We have a bar mitzvah program. We have a little bit of everything for everybody. We have a very successful Hebrew school that has a $10,000 operational deficit, which is fine. We're happy to spend the money. We keep it small, simple, meaningful. We don't try to be the greatest. We try to find many ways to bring young people in. There isn't just one solution. Having a large Hebrew school means a lot of debt, means a lot of subsidy. It might not be the healthiest thing. But developing a strong bar mitzvah program that doesn't require them to be a member, that doesn't require them to have gone to Hebrew school, might be part of the solution, because people are not doing that anymore, right?
Yours is like a Sunday school?
It's a Tuesday night or Sunday. You have a choice of which day of the week you want to come. Not a full-fledged. No, I wouldn't operate that at this point. Last thought for the evening. When you want to build a big boat, instead of sitting around giving out tasks and saying, you're going to get the lumber, you're going to get the nails, you're going to bring the glass, you're going to bring the metal, you're going to bring the food. Instead of doing that, you teach people to long for the immensity of the sea, and they will build the boat. If this congregation reminds each other about the immensity of your accomplishments, and you speak highly of yourselves and of others in your congregation, and you're grateful for the gift you've been able to give this city, that is the longing for the immensity of the sea, and that boat will get built. Everybody here knows how to build a boat, but everybody here needs to know why to build that boat. So keep going on your mission. You'll be great. I'm happy to help. Thank you for having me.
Rabbi, we just wanted to say thank you so much for coming here and sharing your vision with us, and it's given us a lot to think about. Please join us for dessert, and I'm sure the attendees this evening will have a lot of questions that maybe you'll have a few moments to yourself, but I hope you get bombarded by a lot of questions.
No, I'm all yours. I'm all yours. Till the last cake is eaten, I'm here.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Please join us in the Skylight Lounge for some refreshments. And thank you all for being a part of this very important conversation.